Welcome to the Story 516 podcast, where we sit down with Christians from across denominations and talk about how God is at work in the world today and inspire you to see God at work in your own life in new ways. Welcome back to the Story 516 podcast. Today I am joined by Kellyn Roth. She's a friend of mine. We've known each other for probably, I was trying to think about this, 7 or 8 years. We met going through a coaching program for writers, and then a couple years after that, worked together doing some online writing tutoring for students, and then kind of re-met going through another writing training program, which we both have ended up working for now, called the Author Conservatory. Kellyn, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, and I know I gave kind of the little mini Cliff Notes version bio on how we met, but I was curious, there's a lot more to you than how I met you, more history, more context. So I was curious if you could give everyone a brief bio of who you are, what you do, passions, interests, kind of whatever you want to share.
Yeah, absolutely. Like Zach said, I am Kellyn Roth. Though if you meet me, you're welcome to call me Kel because I feel like Kellen can be hard to remember. I grew up, let's see, in the Pacific Northwest, like on a little ranch with my family, and I was homeschooled, so I had a ton of time to start writing. And so that's what I've been doing since I was probably 6 or 7 years old. At first, my older siblings and my mom would write down stories for me, and they were quite creative. Usually, it would involve some kind of talking animal because I've always grown up really loving animals. So now I don't really write about animals except as counterparts to their human, owners. But yeah, when I was 15, I published my first novel independently, and I've kept publishing historical fiction novels since then, usually with some romance, but not always. And basically, I feel strongly that we need more great fiction in this world. And for me personally, that looks like writing Christian fiction for like newer adult women who are looking for a romance that is not gushy, but also tackles some tough topics, basically like Downton Abbey-ish novels, but for Christians. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm passionate about. And now I'm, living still in the Pacific Northwest with my husband and border collie and cat, and just too many fish, way too many fish, and writing novels and working for the Offer Conservatory. So, yep.
And too many fish, like, do you have an aquarium?
I have an aquarium. My friend and I got into setting up beta fish sororities because you can keep a bunch of beta females together and they won't kill each other usually. So we've started doing that, and it's become a hobby on the side.
Nice,
So yeah.
nice. Well, kind of as you were talking, you published your first novel at 15, you said?
Yes, that's correct.
So, what inspired you to get started that young? Because that's pretty young to kind of start any sort of career type pursuits, let alone self publishing a novel.
Yeah, well, it was a number of things. The first was that I'd finally finished a book a couple years before that, maybe I was 13 or 12. And I was a part of the Youth Writers Program version of NaNoWriMo at that time. And everyone was like into indie publishing. And I was like, oh, this is a thing. So I think I had a friend at the time who was like, oh, I just put out my novel independently. You should do it too. And I was like, oh, that sounds great. And so, yeah, with very little preparation, I kind of dove into that. My sister also is a published author and had been way before I was. She's about 16 years older than I am. So I grew up kind of watching her navigate writing and publishing, and we write very different genres and are very different in terms of personality and just life experience and everything. So I didn't really it was one of those things where I kind of like saw a star doing something really cool far away from me, and I was like, I want to be like that star. Yeah, her name is H.L. Burke. If you want to check out her books, they're really cool. They're fantasy and a mix of different genres, steampunk she writes as well. But yeah, and so I kind of just dove into it, didn't know what I was doing, made a ton of mistakes, had to backtrack and fix a lot of those. but I really loved it. I love the publishing side of things. I know a lot of indie authors say, well, I just publish, so I can get my books out there. I publish because I really enjoy publishing. I think I enjoy the marketing side. And yeah, I enjoy sharing about my writing with friends and people and hearing what they think. So that's kind of how I got started, just jumping in on a wing and a prayer and hoping nothing too tragic happened. And it didn't really.
Yeah, and you've stuck it with it all these years later, which I feel like that's always a good sign for something that has a little more legs or will be a little more long lasting. I think back to a number of like hobbies I've tried over like one summer and they last about one summer. So it's fun to hear people who have found that passion early on and have continued with it. Yeah, but you also mentioned kind of who you're writing for. Did you find growing up what you're writing currently, was that what you were trying to find to read?
To a degree, yes. I mean, I've consumed a lot of different kinds of books. I actually used to read more fantasy as a middle grade child. I talk of people in terms of their genre ranges, not in terms of their ages. I don't know how old middle grade is. I actually just think of myself at that age. I think a lot of the times I write more like the TV shows that I wished exist than the movie or the books that I wished exist. I never grew up and felt like I had a shortage of books. My mom found me thousands of books. I always had something to read, and I loved all of them. I never had a like, oh no, why it doesn't have this moment. I loved it. I was enjoying all of the things that I found. But I did have moments where I was like, I could do that slightly better. And oftentimes that was when confronted with like the kind of hallmarky aspects of the Christian romance genre. I was like, no, I could make this more dramatic and painful. And then I set out to do just that. Yeah, it's been a mix of things. I usually was able to find great books to read as a child, and then I would just want to tweak a little thing. And then, I would also think of like, oh, I wish this movie did this instead of this, or I wish this TV show did this instead of this. Because oftentimes, like if a BBC drama goes on long enough, the characters will make a really poor decision. And you're like, oh no, why did you do that? So, I write to correct those. But no one ever knows where my inspiration comes from because I separate it so greatly from whatever genre and subgenre. So hopefully no one's caught on and been like, oh, that was because she was angry at Ross for being so stupid, like something like that.
I guess how have you stayed in touch with, I guess, your intended audience to kind of stay on top of what they're looking for, how they're responding to the different books being published in their genre or movies and TV coming out? Because like you mentioned, Downton Abbey is very popular. I think it's still very popular. I never got into it. I remember I had other friends who were really into it and said I should watch it. So maybe one day.
Maybe one day, yeah.
Um, so I know like stuff like that is really popular. And do you find that more popular in a Christian market versus secular market?
Well, I would say I don't know. I mean, growing up, I had this assumption that everything I watched was a little hated by the Christian market, and this is not true at all. Like I remember actively being like, I can't tell my friends I watch this TV show because it's got like one curse word in it. They'll hang me out to dry, and of course they wouldn't have. I have very good friends who have always, yeah, who are very solid Christians and yet also have a little bit of common sense and are like, that's not going to kill me. No disrespect to anyone who has convictions about what TV shows they watch, of course, but I personally, am not offended when someone drops a swear word every so often or something. But I find that I also don't feel a need to then write that. So in some ways, I get to fix it for the Christian audience because, like, I know some Christians are going to say, well, there's too much crazy immorality going on in Downton Abbey. And I'm like, well, sure, but we all love a little drama. So maybe I'll just write the dramatic situations happen, but then take a Christian spin on it. So that's kind of what I'll do. Because sometimes I will be faced with a situation where I'm like, well, I want to write this, but I know oftentimes just what a Christian audience needs is to see it from their perspective rather than from a secular perspective, which is a lot of fun for me to write because, that's how I'm viewing it too.
So, one of the big topics we talk about on the podcast is finding God at work in the world today. And that takes on a variety of different answers depending on the different individuals I've spoken with, it's fun to see the unique ways people see God at work in the world today, especially kind of through the lens of either their career, their passions, their interests, kind of the social circles they're in. So, as a writer for primarily like women with historic fiction, I'm just curious, kind of like what your unique perspective on seeing God at work, whether it's through the writing, through the publishing, kind of whatever has stood out to you. I'd love to hear a little bit about kind of where you see God at work in the world.
Yeah, well, I feel like I see God most at work in very little ways. I believe in big miracles and I believe in massive transformations. I more often, I guess, find myself in wonder of something working out perfectly when it shouldn't have. I find that things I'm really supposed to have come easily, and the things I have to work hard for and push for are often kind of just the worst, which is a horrible life lesson. But I like to work hard, so that's generally how God deals with me. He's like, listen, you have got to calm down a little, and this is going to come easily to you, but if you keep on pushing, it's just not. Because I think at his heart, God is the greatest comedian ever. He's the master of the bait and switch. So basically, I believe God is at work in the world in different ways in all our lives, and that's how he works in mine. He tends to like make something easy when it's supposed to happen, and then when it doesn't happen, I'm like, oh my goodness, why do I have to work so hard for this? Am I supposed to learn a lesson here? I'm not going to learn it. I'll come around next time. But yeah, I like exploring kind of that in my books, and I find that I often see it a lot in the world in the Christian fiction community. So, we're all on different journeys in our own ways. We're mostly fighting God every step of the way while we walk on those different journeys. But he is not giving up on us, and he's kind of working in the exact way he has already planned your life to work. So the question becomes for me, like, what can I do to eliminate the ways I'm holding myself back from that plan? Which, by the way, I'm not a prosperity gospel enthusiast, so I'm not saying it will always be perfect and like God's plan for me is going to be like that I'm a wealthy millionaire in a year. Though if that is, what he wants, I'm not going to protest.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm right there with you that if God wants to challenge me with the burden of wealth, I will put in the work.
Mhm. Yes, absolutely. I'm willing to be challenged with great wealth, but also knowing that's not necessarily what's going to happen. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like I struggle to answer like I don't see like these big, 1,000 people were fed by loaves and fishes except in the Bible because I don't pay attention to what's happening 5 seconds away from my house usually. I'm too distracted to know what's going on other than that. But I see like little ways where my friend is blessed by having this like perfect car tossed in her lap when her car broke down. And I'm like, hey, that's God. Like, finding a way to bless you when you had just been, begging for like even like a car that will just run is what she wanted. And she got like a perfect model she wanted. And like it was at a great price. And this older couple had been keeping it safe for her in their garage. And I was just like, that's God. And I know that doesn't really apply so much to like the writing community and all of that. But I think it works out for writers too. I know I've known writers who like their launch has just gone so smoothly or the opposite and they've just had a ton of, trouble getting off the ground, but then it ended up being a huge blessing for them to learn kind of the hard way. So yeah, I think that that's such a vague answer and it's like so generally true that anyone could have said it. But yeah, I mostly see God working in like these tiny little ways and you can miss them if you choose to, which I often do. I'm also often like, oh, just happenstance, whatever. But usually it's so personal that there must be some intelligent design behind it.
Yeah, I love what you said about God being the greatest comedian because I don't think we tend to think about God as a comedian. When you kind of take a step back and examine like your own life, your own story, there's like definitely there are those comedic elements of just how things will sometimes fit together or work out. um it's it's one of those things where it's like it would be very interesting to be able to like sit in with God during a day of work, as it were, and just see behind the like how many eye rolls God gives people who are trying to follow him, but we're people and we stumble and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Do you find yourself incorporating lessons you've learned yourself into your writing? Because I feel like that could be really good. Because I mean, a lot of books you have that time compared to like a movie to really get into somewhere like uh, subtle subtle truths.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I feel like I don't know if I've actually addressed that theme specifically, but I feel like that's a good, kind of overarching summary of all my books is that I just enjoy, yeah, watching people's lives work out like a psychopath, actually. But in a nice way. I want to watch them just like go through things, and these fictional characters that I dreamed up. I tend to talk about them like they're very real people, and then, I enjoy a little bit of, I just enjoy watching them and figuring out how this might have worked out, if it were a real life scenario, and how, God might have worked in their lives if they happen to be real, which of course they are not. And then, of course, I could bring that to God in prayer and just be like, hey, how am I going to pull this off? You're going to have to figure this out for me. And actually, like reading back a book that I finished editing recently, the primary theme was kind of be still and know that I am God, and just rest in the knowledge that He is great and He loves you, and He's not having like any hugely high expectations of yourself, and you can just rest. That's a theme that I myself will struggle with a lot. I don't like to rest. I don't really like to be still and just know. I would like to go out and find out why I know. And oftentimes I do struggle with this idea that, I have to make myself more sufficient when God is already, more than sufficient for any of my needs, my wants, my struggles. Like, I didn't really plan that theme. So oftentimes I'll find myself going back into my books and be like, oh, is that what I was talking about? I don't remember writing this very clearly. I'm sure there's a plan for it. I just don't know what it is. Because plotting themes can always be my weak point, or I don't know, or strong point, depending on how you think of it. I will come up with a character arc and then I'll be like, well, actually, it's changed because this was the more important way of putting it. But yeah, I find myself incorporating, I think, little aspects of that theme into all of my books. But it all pops up in different ways because I try to write a variety of characters who are not all the same. Most of them are not very like me, at least in my head. Though usually, whenever someone I know reads my books, they'll bring up someone who I would not have thought was like me and be like, "Oh yeah, were they based on you?" I'm like, "Them? That's the wrong one. There were characters I put in there intentionally that are a little like me, but not that one. Will you quit it?" But I think we don't always know ourselves, so maybe they're right. But yeah, it sneaks in little ways.
And then I'm just curious, like as a writer, do you find yourself when you're reading other novels, do you find it easier to learn lessons about God through story?
Yes, to a degree. I'm more likely to pick it up from something really random that someone said or something I write, which is again just like it. I feel like narcissistic whenever I talk about my writing because it does inspire me probably way more than it inspires anyone else because I know what the whole thought process was behind like one line that really stood out to me. So I don't always necessarily, well, I pick up on it, but I don't always like get anything out of a story because I know exactly how it works. So I'm more likely to just be like, they did this because of this and this and this, and that's why they, that's how they're trying to tug at my heartstrings. And let me tell you, if I don't want my heartstrings tugged at, there is nothing on earth that can move me to be tugged at. But then there are little things like I was watching It's a Wonderful Life last night, and there was one line where I don't know if you've seen the movie, but you should have.
Yep.
Uh,
Yes, I
yeah,
have.
but
I have.
where George he's a little boy and he's talking to the druggist, and the druggist is upset because his son has died. Sorry for the spoilers, but it's been like what 70, 80 years, so
Right.
sorry.
Yeah, I usually
Um,
give it like if it's been like 8 months, like if the movie's available to like
it's been more than eight
get from
months.
your library.
But anyway, he's like, he's talking to the druggist, and the druggist is so upset because his son has died, and he is almost poisoned the little boy. I feel like this is the most unstraightforward way of saying it for someone who doesn't know exactly what I'm talking about. But anyway, he says, "It's not your fault. I know you're feeling," and I don't know why, but that just made me cry. Like, I know you're feeling. That's so sweet, and it really just says so much about the character and about the arc he goes through, where he just like he doesn't want to be empathetic, but he destroys himself to be empathetic almost. I don't know. Yeah, that made me cry. But like usually other times, like the overall arching plot of the story will not get me. But like little things will, I'll be like, oh, that is so good and so like sad. At least it was when I was watching it at like midnight. So yeah, but I still find it sad. So I guess, but sad in a good way to where he was like so willing to reach out to this man who had just smacked him around and just yeah, do anything to save him and preserve his profession. And I don't know, it was very sweet. So yeah, I wouldn't say that I always glean great lessons from stories, but I do from little moments or from things that happen in real life, especially in movies or songs. Often, I often find a lot of sense through music. So yeah.
Well, I mean, just as you were sharing that, it kind of made me start to like connect different pieces of what you had talked about today. Because earlier you had said something about us choose, like if we choose to see God in like those little to bigger ways. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
getting this sense of like almost like this theme of God showing up in those kind of unexpected ways where you can even be like that God's like creative enough that even when we're on guard, where it's like, I'm not going to let my heartstrings be tugged, that a truth can like slip by that we're not expecting.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why I think, again, God is such a comedian because really comedy is about the unexpected. And oftentimes, he needs to reach everyone in a different way, I'm sure. But I will oftentimes, be more attached to a comedic TV show than I will be to some long dramatic thing. Like I'm probably more attached to the characters of The Office than I ever will be to a lot of really long dramatic procedural shows that I'm just like, no, and I think that people really do connect through comedy and through what is, it lowers your barriers and your defenses. And yes, it's not exactly the same as like, yeah, a television show. God's not like a sitcom host or anything. It is that moment of unexpected that will just like, yeah, what you said, break through whatever defenses or barriers that you have up and reach you in a different way.
Cool. I think, yeah, I think that's a great reminder, a great thing to keep in mind. Kind of, we're recording this in December of 24. We're getting ready to, in about a week, move into the new year. So I think that's a great reminder to have for the new year is to almost expect the unexpected, expect God to find those funny ways to reach us kind of with however we communicate personally, which, like you said, is different for every individual.
Oh yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Kel. If people are curious about finding you online, finding your books, where is the best place for them to go for that?
Well, I would say that they will find all of the information on everywhere they can find me on my website, which is kellynrothauthor.com. So, KLYNROTH author.com. And actually, if you just type in kellynroth.com, it'll pop up too, but that's a redirect. Anyway, that's some tech nonsense you don't need to know about. What I'm trying
Yeah.
to say is if you go there, you will find my books and you will find my social media where I'm fairly active on Instagram and almost nowhere else. But you're welcome to follow me on Twitter and see if I ever say anything. You never know.
Thank you for joining us. You can support the show by going to our Patreon page at patreon.com/story516. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. We look forward to seeing you next time.